Hello and welcome to the Weekly Wave episode 5. Today we're going to be talking about another 10 albums. It's been a little while since I recorded the last one of these, so I've kind of had to cheat a little bit on the 10 for this week and just sort of take and select what I thought would make probably the most interesting list of 10, because I've listened to more than 10 since the last time I did one of these. So I've just tried to get something where it's nice and balanced. We've got some pretty rough stuff. I want to showcase some of the terrible things that I've listened to in the last 3 or so weeks, I guess now, since the last one. And also there's been some really good strong highlights right near the top. A few little bits in between, but I've tried to keep things a little bit to the extremes today. So hopefully you'll enjoy the descriptions of the next 10 albums. And yeah, let's get started with our number 10 for the week. Okay, so at number 10 this week, we are going to be talking about Dave Blunt's album from this year, Well Dude, Here's My Thing, which you might have heard of Dave Blunt's recently for some of his pretty viral performances where he sat on like a sofa performing on stage. He's like quite a big bloke, to say the least, and his sort of song's gone pretty viral recently, The Cup, which I actually am a huge fan of. It's I think he's plastered that on a couple of his albums that have come out this year, this one included. So just to get out of the way first, that is by far the best thing on this album, and definitely the only thing of any real quality anywhere on this. It is like laughably terrible, this album. There's just like this repetition of the names Madison and Abigail on every single song. Like every character he sings about is called Madison or Abigail. I think there's like a guy's name as well, Matthew or something like that. I just don't really understand what is going on with this album, to be honest. This is one of the worst things I've ever listened to, this album, definitely. It's probably a little bit under 40 minutes, so it's not like as painfully long as it could have been for something that's as bad as this. I've probably had harder listening experiences in this one, but this one was by far the worst thing that I've talked about, definitely so far on here. Overall, definitely one of the worst albums I've ever listened to. The songs are just repetition of the same one from before. Like literally, in a lot of cases, there is songs maybe about 4 or 5 apart on the track list that are just the same as one that was on earlier, with like a slightly different beat but the same lyrics or something. It's like a very like demo-y, but I mean it's not marketed as a demo. It seems to be like an actual album. Has like a relatively professional album cover and all that kind of thing. So can't listen to this one thinking I'll probably get the best idea of what else to expect from him outside of The Cup. But let's just call this one of the worst things that we've talked about so far and move on pretty quickly. Worst album that you will ever come across, possibly. And let's get into another deeply disappointing one. And get straight into it. It's Linkin Park's From Zero at number 9 this week. So I'm sure I've mentioned on previous episodes how much of a Linkin Park fan I was growing up. This whole new cycle has just been a load of needless drama. Nothing particularly constructive said from either side. I'm not really going to go too much into Emily Armstrong, like the new singer, as a person, or like what it means for the direction of the band or anything like that. Because I think the album just kind of speaks for itself. It's the worst of Linkin Park's music up to this date. I think this is where I mentioned it previously. I haven't listened to One More Light, so I can't talk about that. I know that one wasn't a particularly well received album, so I'm assuming that it's probably a similar kind of level to this kind of thing. But I think Mike Shinoda's like one of the kind of perks of having Chester Bennington as a singer for them, as well as how good he was how he could like sort of mask Mike Shinoda's sort of shortcomings as a rapper. And some of their songs have become like pretty iconic, but I don't think anyone really goes to those songs to listen to the quality of Mike Shinoda's verses and stuff. So without Chester to kind of mask him, he comes across a lot more like potent in this album, and I think this is his worst performances by quite a long way. Emily Armstrong sounds like features on most of the songs, which doesn't sound like a permanent member of the band. Like it's just very forced. I'm not a huge fan of her like vocal style anyway. The kind of screaming, the strained vocals and stuff. I don't think that they suit her that well, because I think when she sings cleaner, she definitely sounds a lot better. But if that's the direction they want to go into, I think the Screaming wouldn't be as bad if the music matched in tone, but this is quite like a poppy album. Definitely lost a lot of the harder edge stuff of some like the early albums. There's no riffs to that quality. The band's kind of been falling apart a little bit in that direction. The guitarist refusing to tour or choosing not to tour. Provided guitar for this, but I think again that does make a difference somewhere. And yeah, I think it's just sad to see what Linkin Park are looking like with this album with From Zero, and hopefully they can get better if they carry on. They're as popular as ever with this whole new thing that's coming about. If they can maintain the popularity from the next album, then I'm sure we've got a lot more to come down the pipeline. But yeah, this From Zero album was very disappointing. The best song on there, Two Faced, was probably the best. That's one that sort of stood out to me the most when I was listening to it. Probably the one where Emily Armstrong sounded the most natural, like sort of at home in the band and stuff. So yeah, give that one a go. If you like that one, yeah, you'll probably like this new incarnation of Linkin Park. I can't say that if you like this, you'd necessarily like their old stuff because it is so drastically different. But yeah, I mean, why not give it a try and see if you agree that it's kind of lost a little bit of the magic of the old releases. But yeah. This Linkin Park album is number 9. So continuing on with the downfall of these sort of old established very popular bands, we've got Pixies' album that came out probably a couple of months ago now, The Night That the Zombies Came. This wasn't unexpected at all. The last couple of albums have headed more in this kind of like loungy dad rock kind of direction. Obviously they're getting older, you can't expect them to be putting out anything like their old sort of stretch of albums like they had in the sort of late 80s, early 90s and stuff, but I think it's a little bit disappointing just to hear them diluted down to this level. I think especially when you see Kim Deal still making, not obviously heavy stuff by any means, but still a little bit like rockier, still in that alternative indie direction. This Pixies new look is just kind of so like uninspiring. I think you could come across, I mean, the sad thing is I feel like they're just going to be pushing away potential new audience with this kind of quality of stuff, because if you showed anyone the first Pixies albums, they'll be impressed by them, because they're just undisputed classic albums of sort of like indie rock punk sort of style of music. So this new stuff just going to this bland direction where other bands have done it so much better, I don't think is a great look for them. I think that as boring as it is, there's like little sort of shining lights across it where Frank Black kind of shows off how good of a songwriter he is. You kind of get reminded for a second that you're listening to Pixies. It's easy to forget listening to this completely, but you're sort of reminded more in the sort of little sparks of creativity and quality that sort of pop up, as any good musicians will be able to do. Even in their worst stuff, you can still hear the little sort of shines of the greatness of the groups and stuff. So yeah, I've not got a lot to say about this one. I think if you're sort of into that middle of the road dad rock, acoustic lounge sort of music, then hearing Pixies do it might scratch an itch for you. But if you're coming across Pixies for the first time, or you're not too familiar with their sort of catalogue, definitely go back and listen to their first 4 albums, 4 or 5. Surfer Rosa, Bossa Nova, all those ones, the early releases, and yeah, probably one to avoid, honestly, but give it a try. Best song is I Hear You Mary. Again, probably just the one that had the most reminders of sort of that old Pixies sound, or the most identifiable Pixies song off this. But yeah, not too much more to say. I'm going to start to cheer up a little bit as we come into this middle part of the list, because I'd say here's where we sort of take a bit of an uptake. But I wanted to talk about the Dave Blunt's Linkin Park and Pixies albums as just sort of like disappointments. Dave Blunt's, I wasn't expecting a miracle from it or anything, but definitely the other two, there was more potential there, and gotta say disappointed with the 3 of them. But yeah, let's get into our album number 7 on episode 5. So before we get into these kind of really standout stuff towards the top of the list, there was a couple of albums I wanted to talk about at 7 and 6 that are albums from this year, pretty recent releases from bands. I was really excited for them to release these 2 albums, and They're sort of bands I've followed for a little while. I've been really big fans of their sort of previous releases, and the first of those two, the one that I think is slightly not quite as good as the number 6 album, is Amyl and the Sniffers' Cartoon Darkness. So Amyl and the Sniffers have had like a really strong, quick rise in the last couple of years, and for like really good reason. They're a really great, charismatic sort of Australian punk band. I think it was expected that this album would be their kind of transition more into a more accessible, more mainstream album. They knew to have more eyes on this than they ever have probably coming into any other album releases in the past. And the best song off the album is Jerkin, which was one of the singles that they released building up to. I think it might have been the last single before the album came out. But I think there's a good mix of stuff on here. Like the album starts really strong. And I think it just sort of trails off in the middle a little bit. It becomes a little bit like predictable. I can't say it was as like watered down as I thought it would be. I think there's still like a lot of like sort of aggression to the vocals, and it's still like quite edgily written. You know, it's not like radio friendly in a lot of cases. It's still got that kind of like a rebellious edge to it that a lot of their other stuff does. But I think ultimately they have sort of gone more in that direction where people will go for something that's a little bit more re-listenable. And I think sometimes you get these albums where they kind of do they find like the idea for the song they think is going to take off. They do quite a few versions of that on the same album, kind of try and find an audience for everything that's on there rather than, and I think that sort of sums it up. You don't get that full cohesive album experience. And the reason I wanted to talk about this album side by side with the number 6 one is because there's a lot of similarities in that, even though the bands are so different. And that's and I'd sort of go into the number 6 album at the same time, is Chat Pile's Cool World. So Chat Pile, obviously a lot more obscure than Amyl and the Sniffers. Definitely kind of picked up a kind of like a hipstery following in the last couple of years. They had one of it was sort of every couple of years or every year, there's a few heavy albums that get picked up by the pitchfork crowds, the kind of hipstery audience. And it's bizarre. You always wonder what makes them pick these albums, but that was sort of where I picked up their album God's Country from a couple of years ago from. And that album, I've got to say, was absolutely brilliant. One of my favourite albums of that year, if not the best album of that year. And this, again, it's a lot of what I just said about Amyl and the Sniffers can be said about this as well. It's slightly diluted, not as politically strong. God's Country was like a really strongly political album, sort of commenting on the state of Oklahoma in particular. When I say state, I don't know. Oklahoma is a state or a city? I think it's a city. But the state of Oklahoma, like the condition of Oklahoma. So, you know, there's less of that here. I guess there's only so much you can say about Oklahoma in your first couple of big mainstream album releases. But this one, it's you know, it's catchier. There's definitely more replayability to this one than there was in the last one. Last one would kind of hit you. You maybe get fixated on a song for a little bit because it was so sort of impactful, and then you can't move on to the next one. This one, definitely the album works a little bit more in a kind of going back to it and listening to it more. The song Funny Man has like a lot of that's my favourite one off this album, and that has quite like a strong sort of Korn influence to it. And I think it's like a great thing for them to have incorporated some more of these accessible styles into their music, because they deserve to be like heard by more people. And sometimes, like, you know, bands have got to change the way they are a little bit just to cater towards a wider audience. But I think they've done it as well here as you could expect them to do it. Just the overall quality of the album doesn't quite hit the standard of God's Country. But I definitely think they could make something the way that they've made this album that would rival the quality of that album. I think it just happens that this set of songs isn't quite at that level. But yeah, so Amyl and the Sniffers are number 7 and Chat Pile number 6. Two good albums that I hope expose both of those albums to more and more people. And yeah, let's leave those two albums there and head into the top 5. So number 5, the middle of the list this week, we've got Chemical Brothers' Exit Planet Dust, which was a 1995 big beat release. Probably one of the albums that has kind of shaped the genre of big beat the most out of sort of anything going back. I guess you could sort of throw Underworld and other things into that, but again, it's not my sort of area of expertise, this style of music. The only real big beat I'd ever been super into before this was probably Basement Jaxx. But yeah, to get into this one, this is one of those albums again. It's considered to be a classic of this sort of style, very like influential, like a bit of a founding album of this genre, and it doesn't necessarily like cut it for me too much in the way of like enjoyment. I can't say I was listening to this and being like captivated in the way that I have by like other albums in the past. Of course, like the other albums on this list ahead of it. But I think it's one of those again. You just have to acknowledge the quality, acknowledge the time that it came out. It's genius level production on this stuff. Like the bass is just so like prominent and like driving. It's so like intense and heavy. I sometimes find sort of the synth styles and stuff used on Big Beat to be a little bit like not my kind of thing. But I think here, because it has got that like darker, groovier edge to it, yeah, it does work for me more than it would maybe from other sort of artists releasing the same style. The song to the Siren was the one that stood out to me the most. It's got like a really cool sort of like siren-y sample going all the way through it. Very like almost a little bit like Ministry. It's sort of like something that like industrial metal would pick out as like a sample to throw in, sort of like a sound effect that sort of runs all the way through the whole song. And you know, I think it's kind of got, sometimes it goes a little bit into that sort of spy film, early 2000s Mission Impossible action scene kind of sound, which is a little bit dated, but you'd expect an electronic album released in 1995 at this point, about 30 years on, to sound dated. You know, it's impossible to make, especially when you've got such a pioneering sound where people are always evolving that kind of genre. So many other movements of electronic music have come out since this one, and I think this album has every right to be as well respected and sort of in demand as it is in music circles and stuff. So definitely I would recommend listening to this one. It's a real classic, and if you are into your Big Beat and warehouse project kind of like music, then you will absolutely love this. So yeah, I'm not going to talk too much more about Chemical Brothers, but yeah, it is definitely worthy of the number 5 on this sort of set of 10 albums. And yeah, let's get into our number 4 album for this week's episode. And yeah, let's just go straight into it. So we've got W.H. Lung's Every Inch of Earth Pulsates. They are a Manchester band, or a Manchester-based band anyway. That's sort of where they've popped up. I'm not sure where they are now, but you know, I really enjoy all of the music that I've heard from W.H. Lung so far. It's been a little while since their last album, Vanities. I think it was around 2020, 2021 kind of time that they released that. And that is a really good album. They're very sort of New Order inspired, and that definitely carries over onto this album as well. But that album in particular had it was a lot more electronic. This one kind of started to incorporate more guitar-y, indie kind of influences to it, alongside the New Order influence as well. And I think that's like a really good movement for them to have gone in, like good direction for them. The vocalist he's great. Like if you ever get the opportunity to go and watch W.H. Lung, definitely go and do it. Their stage presence is amazing. They sound even better live than they do on their albums. They have like a style that really lends itself to live setting. You know, it's got like the really bassy, the synth stuff comes through like really well. His vocals are great live, really well done. And yeah, you know, I was just really happy to see that this album was as good as it was. Again, the best song on here is Bloom and Fade for me, but you could pick out anything because it's not a very diverse album. It kind of has its style. Every song it is relatively similar to the other, which can be a negative on some albums, but obviously if you can recreate a great song so many times over, that's going to come across a lot better than it would if you're Dave Blunt's doing it on on the album we talked about before. But yeah, you know, I've not got too much again to say on this. I'm not going into too much detail on it. I think this is one that you definitely should go and check out. If you are into New Order, Manchester style music, then this is absolutely something that you'd really enjoy. I think you could expect them to be touring around the Manchester area, around the UK at some point pretty soon. I think it'd been a little while before this release that they were last around, so go and check them out. Definitely listen to this album, and yeah, let me know what you think of that one. And yeah, let's get into our number 3 for this week. So number 3 on the list this week is Super Heaven's Ours is Chrome. So Super Heaven are probably, to be honest, most well known for that meme, that Breaking Bad meme music. You know, one with Jesse where there's like grungy style music playing in the background. And it's cool that the bands can sort of resurface in that way, the way that they have from the success of like that music, that sound bite being used in that. But they've only had 2 albums. They've been sort of on hold for about 10 years. They actually just released a new song, must have been a couple of weeks ago, that prompted me to go and listen to this one, because I'd listened to Jar, I think their previous album was called, but the more recent album of these two. This was their first album that they released under the name Superheaven. And I'm really, really happy that I went back and listened to this one, because it's probably a little bit below the quality of Jar, but I hope it is called Jar again, because once I've decided to call it that, that's what I'm going to call it. So if it's not called Jar, I'll correct myself in the next entry. But the song Leech is probably my song of the year now, like song that I've sort of listened to this year for the first time. I've been listening to that absolutely non-stop since this album came out, and what's so cool about Superheaven is, on paper, and when you listen to them, you can't think, the sound of it is, it's just like sort of 90s grunge, like a complete like homage to 90s grunge music. But because the vocalist has such a sort of different sounding voice to that kind of more drawly sound that a lot of the vocalists in the 90s had in that style, they fit in perfect. Sorry, the dishwasher's just started up. They fit in as sort of as their own band. I might see how loud that sounds on the after I finish talking. I'm hoping it's going to finish. But yeah, let's pause it there, and I'll start this one again. Okay, so what I was just about to say there was that they sort of almost have, if you can isolate them from knowing that these releases came out in the early 2010s, this one, obviously, I'm sort of talking about them grouped together. That's kind of because there is very much a continuation, the second album from this one. They've got very much their style. It is 90s grunge. But you can kind of consider them and treat them like their own 90s grunge band. They kind of benefit from like modern production and stuff. They sound really, really good. The vocalists, they share some responsibilities on here, and they're just a really, really good, great, catchy listen. All of their music is really, really catchy. That seems to be their MO, sort of catchiness first, and then not a lot of substance lyrically and all that kind of thing. But I don't think anyone's really listening to grunge too much for the lyricism and the poetic kind of nature of the music. So this is definitely worthy of being here at number 3. I was really, really happy that this album was as good as the one before. I'm hoping that this new song that they've released will be a bit of a lead up to a new album. I can't see why you'd release a single out of nowhere for 10 years on if there wasn't some sort of plan to release some more new stuff. So we'll keep an eye on that, cover anything that they release here on the channel, and yeah, let's move on now that the dishwasher is done to our number 2 spot. It's number 2 this week. If you told me a couple of months ago when I started coming up with the sort of idea to do these videos and stuff, that I would be talking about Ed Sheeran's Plus at number 2 on one of these top 10s, I would have been very surprised. I probably wouldn't have believed you, but yeah, Ed Sheeran's Plus, the debut Ed Sheeran album, is here at number 2 this week. I just had the urge to listen to it the other day. I loved it when it came out. I guess I would have been 11 or 12 when that album came out, and I always remembered it being really good. It was one of my first CDs, and listening back to it, it is actually a real indicator of how he's gone on to have the successful career that he's had. The songs on here are just like, they're more trendy, definitely, than the stuff he's going to write. He's sort of become a bit of a sort of in-house writer for other sort of big pop names. He's kind of gone down the wedding song route a little bit. But these early ones, there was sort of some grime influence and stuff. Clearly that was something that he was very interested in. He had those collaboration projects and things along those lines and stuff. But the songs on here, the singles, when you look back at them, the Lego House, A-Team, Give Me Love, You Need Me, I Don't Need You, songs like that, just great songs, really, really good pop songs. He's a very intelligent guy. You can tell that when you listen to him, and I think this album, I think it's easy to sort of hate on Ed Sheeran these days, but I think sometimes you just got to remind yourself how these major names get to where they get to. It isn't sort of fluke, and you don't get to do that kind of thing and be the names that you are unless you can grab a big audience early. And that's obviously what happened with Ed Sheeran. He was a huge name. He had great music for the first few years of his career, especially, and then, as I say, he just sort of chose to maybe just not push the boat out as much with what he was going for. The ambition kind of faded a little bit. But I think this album is just like a really good celebration of that early 2010s British scene as well. There's no features on here, but I think if you go and listen to that number 5 collaborations project from the time, you've got some like the really sort of cool up and coming grime names from that kind of time there. And yeah, I really wanted to put this here and talk about this one here because it is an album that I have always have felt really quite strongly about. I think it is a really good album. I can't say anything to the level of praise I'm giving to this about any of the other music he's ever released since. He's definitely not done anything that I've been interested in for the past 5 years at the very least, 5 or 6 years. And yeah, go and listen to Grade 8 if you want one of the deeper cut songs that didn't end up being such a big hit like a lot of them did. It's just they're great acoustic, catchy songs. So yeah, I don't think there's much not to like. And yeah, let's go straight into number 1. So number 1 this week is Boston Manor's Sundiver. And Boston Manor, you might have heard of them as a bit of like a pop punk band from a good few years ago, sort of coming around that way. And this has kind of boosted them up a little bit. I've seen them a lot on festival lineups. This came out again a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago probably now. I wanted to talk about this one a bit quicker, but this is sort of, I feel like I've sort of got into the habit with these albums of putting these kind of heavier albums towards the top. But this one, it's obviously it's not on the level of like a Kublai Khan or Harriet or anything along those lines. This is a lot lighter. These are, I would say, probably the next sort of the replacement for Deftones, now that they're becoming a little bit less unproductive and not quite as prolific with their music as they were back then. I think these have picked up that sound. They've kind of taken modern production, really applied that to it. You can tell that they have that ear for melody and hook that a lot of pop punk bands do. And they've just kind of expanded it out a little bit more into what you could consider more of like a metal genre, a little bit more aggressive, but still really hooky and really catchy. And yeah, I think Boston Manor was a real surprise for me when I listened to this one. I thought it'd be good. I've never disliked any of their stuff in the past. I've just sort of felt a little bit indifferent towards it, but thought this one was getting a little bit of buzz, so to give it a go. And absolutely way worth it. It was really good fun listen. Quite short, very easy to listen to, and yeah, comes in at number 1. Not too much more to say about it. Really great vocalist. There is actually a feature by Harriet on there, who are one of my favourites. That might have influenced my enjoyment of it a little bit, although it was the last song on the album, so maybe not. But yeah, and that'll do it really. Thanks very much for watching. If you've got all the way to the end here. If there's anything you want me to listen to in the future, please comment. Let me know, and it will make it. Trust me. So let's leave it there. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back for episode 6. See you later.